Hello, everyone. My name is Alex LaPierre. I'm the Program Director for Nonprofit Border Community Alliance, and I want to thank you for joining us today for this Friday's edition of the forum. Today, the subject is documenting the Borderlands and archival journey, and we're lucky to have presenter Rachael Black, and she's a librarian and archivist at the Arizona Historical Society in Tucson, and she has a background in Southwest studies with an emphasis on cultural geography. I want to thank her for being here today. She's going to give her presentation, and feel free to save your questions for the end during the Q&A to ask Rachael directly, or if something comes up during the presentation, feel free to utilize that chat box as well. So without further ado, thank you so much, Rachael, and we're really looking forward to your presentation.
All right, well, thanks for being here, everybody. As Alex said, my name's Rachael, and I'm a librarian and archivist at the Arizona Historical Society's Tucson location. We're located here in central Tucson, right off of the University of Arizona campus. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about just a general overview of kind of a bit of a philosophical approach to what are archives and what we have in this region, and then end with some highlights of some kind of hidden gems from the collections that we have here at the Historical Society. All right, so to start it off, what really are archives? The technical definition is that they are the permanently valuable records such as letters, reports, accounts, manuscripts, photographs of people, businesses, and governments. Academically, they're really the facts that we use to interpret and understand history. So if you've ever read any historical books, those are based a lot of the time on archival research from various different sources. And a bit more broadly, I like this definition that I think of them as they're persistent representations of activities created by participants or observers of those activities or by their authorized proxies. So that's very wordy, but what it means is, to me, is that it's the records that we create in the course of our daily lives, whether that's the records we leave as we're going about our daily business, or if we are keeping a diary, if we are involved in an organization. It's what we leave. It's kind of our paper trail of what we leave behind, but it's more than just the physical documents. It's also sort of the meanings that we impart on those. So there are various different types of archives, and they're used for different purposes. The broad one is government records. Those are every time you fill out the census, every time you create a birth certificate. Those are the things to record that the government needs to know who we are. Eventually, a lot of those become publicly available for future researchers or as needed. Business records, of course, those are things that any company creates that they need. Those aren't necessarily required to be made public, but a lot of the historic ones are. We've got our family and personal papers. So these are all of your, letters that your grandparents wrote to each other during World War II, or your family photographs that you keep safe. There's also, so more specifically, there's specific types of materials. We've got your typical paper documents, photographs, diaries and journals. We've got maps, films, videos, those all count as archives. These are also all things that if you're ever doing historical research, you'll encounter a lot of these. And then there's other things that are not really like written or official records. And those get into your oral histories, things that are more ephemeral in nature. We here at the Arizona Historical Society count our newspapers as part of our archives because they are such a rich record of what's happening in the region. So what can we learn from archives? They're historical facts, so they are a record of history made at the time that that history is being made. They tell us things about where people lived, so we're talking census records, how they moved around in their lives, what they did for work. They give us a broad view of states and regional and national histories. We've got here in Arizona, we have written records going back to Spanish colonial times that give us that really broad view of history, but they also tell us the social histories. So they give us things like diaries, give us a personal view of not just like what this person did, but what they thought about it, their own personal feelings on a topic, which gives another important aspect to that history. There's also, when you look at personal papers, this will give you a lot of information about what is left out of official records. And by really looking into, how for example, looking at how a census taker in the 1900s wrote down someone's ethnicity versus how that person identified can tell you a lot about the social histories of an area. It can also, reading between the lines and seeing how people are categorized by like official documents throughout time and how that changes, can give you a really broad, a really good view of how a region changed too. For example, if you're ever doing census research for like a family research, if you're of Hispanic descent, you'll find that for a certain portion of time, and it comes and goes, that your ancestors might be listed as white, or they'll later be changed to listed as Hispanic. So it shows how a society's notion of people changed throughout history. Accessing materials, we've got here in Arizona, we've got a wealth of materials online, largely through the Arizona Memory Project. And there's also fee services that you can access, your newspapers.com, your ancestry.com to access these things. But for Arizona, we've got a good collection of Arizona newspapers. Like this one is the Fort Huachuca, it's the Buffalo, and it was the 92nd Infantry's newspaper published out of Fort Huachuca during World War II. Genealogy resources, these are census records, birth certificates. The state archives has digitized birth certificates prior to, I think, 1920s. You can access historic birth certificates. They're all indexed and free, and you can download them online. We also have a collection, if you're interested in how cities and towns have changed, the Library of Congress has Sanborn maps, which are property research maps. We use them a lot here in Tucson because people really like to research their historic houses. They also tell you a lot about how the built environment changed, and a lot of them will have details about the names of business owners or ethnicities of house owners, and show you how demographics of a city have changed. I also learned just recently that the ones for Sanborn maps for cities on the border, like this one is for Nogales, they oftentimes have details about the southern side of the border. So the Nogales maps also have several blocks where they'll show the details about the city blocks for Sonora side. This is also true in El Paso, has some of the southern parts of the border, as well as some other ones. So kind of interesting. The other major thing that we use here a lot to kind of give an idea of how people moved around cities and states is our city directories, and the Arizona Memory Project also has collections of city directories for most cities in Arizona, digitized at least through the 1920s. So there's a lot that you can find online if you're interested in a certain topic. But you do get to a point where you just have to go find this stuff in person. And so here in Arizona and the Borderlands area, if you're interested in finding these sorts of materials, the big players are going to be colleges and universities, the state archives located up in Phoenix, and us here at the Arizona Historical Society. And so the state archives is where you would find official records for the state and territory of Arizona, as well as records related to counties. All of those eventually wind up at the state archives as official public records held by the state. They are accessible to anybody, and actually the state archives, they're big and busy, but they are helpful. So don't be afraid to call and ask. Here, colleges and universities and us at the Arizona Historical Society, we get collections that are unofficial records. So we have a lot of family collections, business records, various things like that. There's also smaller institutions will oftentimes have a rich history of their local region. A lot of local public libraries have collections. Some are bigger than others. One of the larger ones is the Yuma Public Library, has an outstanding collection of archives related to Yuma. Local historical societies also have a lot of collections. The Pimeria Alta, they have a good collection. We refer people to them a lot. Tribal governments will also have their own collections. Those are a little, just because of the nature of the history of tribes, they're a little less accessible to the public if you're not a member of the tribe. But a lot of them do have cultural centers and museums that I encourage you to visit. And then there's also a lot of smaller community organizations that have archives. Like here in Tucson, we have 2 good community organizations that hold their own archives. One is the Dunbar School, which is the African American Community Center now, and they have a lot of history related to the African American community in Tucson. And the Chinese Cultural Center also has a good, they've got a good set of oral histories, as well as some collections related to the Highwell grocery store in Benson. And so if you're interested in this work and you are located in a community or have ties to a community, sometimes it's good just to ask your neighbors. You know, sometimes a lot of people will have materials stored away from generations of families. And if you can forge a relationship and you're interested in looking at stuff, they might let you. And also on that point, if you are involved with a community organization or a smaller local historical society, the Arizona State University has a grant that they got funding for back in 2017 to support the development and maintenance of community archives. So if you are part of a smaller organization or know about community archives, you can contact ASU and they can help you. They provide training and guidance to preserve and make these archives available to broader communities. Okay, so moving on here, we're going to get into a little bit of so I talked a little bit about the more generally available materials. So I know a lot of people have probably done genealogy research or personal family history research. So you might be familiar with resources available in Ancestry.com or might have used those for a different sort of project. But I always try to encourage people to go deeper, and you can use archives to come at a well-known topic from a different direction. So one example of this is we had a researcher in who was researching labor rights, and particularly around the strikes and the Bisbee deportation. And this was a letter that he found, was looking to get outside of the newspaper articles and things that we found. And he actually found in John Greenway's collection, which is one of our larger collections, this letter from Theodore Roosevelt in response to correspondence from John Greenway about the strikes and the Bisbee deportation. So this brings it's a candid letter from a very high level public figures that gives a different approach, a different point of view to a topic that we kind of know a lot about. Other things that we've done recently with researchers is there's a couple of researchers that we work with through the University of Arizona who are working on I joke, I call it the re-wetting. They're working on increasing stream flows in the Santa Cruz River and our other desert ephemeral rivers through effluent and reclaimed water. And so part of what they've come to us for is to see if they can identify what the landscape used to look like. So here's a couple things that we found for people: a view of the Santa Cruz River from a mountain with you can see the mesquite bosque is still intact. And we've got a lot of repeat photography so this is for less of they're not your typical historian researching this, but someone who is really looking to see if they can restore an environmental area. And then the photo that we have on the right is it's from the 1940s, and it's a crop survey that was done in the Tucson Basin. So these have both been used in environmental studies to make cases for restoring flows in our rivers. So archives aren't just for historians or genealogy researchers. All right, and now I thought that we have a lot of photographs here at our collections at the Arizona Historical Society, and we have several big collections that people know about. But I kind of wanted to highlight, like we've got the John Greenway papers, we have the Ronstadt family papers, but I wanted to highlight a few of my kind of hidden gems of collections, things that we don't pull a lot for researchers, but if you are interested in a broad history of the Borderlands region, they are really, really rich and detailed. One of them is this Colorado River reclamation projects. These are all material related to water reclamation projects, building the dams and the canals in Yuma. A lot of these are, they're actually, the bulk of it is copies and notes written by Bureau of Reclamation staff when they were doing these projects in the 1900s. And so it's kind of nice because the official records relating to these projects are held by the National Archives because they are the Bureau of Reclamation. They are a federal agency, and so by law, their archives have to be held by the National Archives at one of their repositories, either in California, or these ones might actually be back in Washington, D.C. But with this collection, we've got a lot of copies of those original records. So if you're interested in this topic, you don't have to make a trip back to DC. There's also a lot of photos that were taken as not as part of official records, like this one, that are included. And it's just a really neat collection because it shows the progress, and we've got details about when they were buying land to put in these dams and put in these irrigation systems. And it's really in depth about the history of the water use. Another one, we have a couple unique collections related to Customs and Border Patrol in the region. One that's really rich in detail is the Earl Fallis photo collection, which we actually have available on, parts of it have been digitized and they're put up on our website. So Earl Fallis was the chief inspector for the US Border Patrol, the Tucson sector during the 1930s. So if you're interested in the sort of evolution of policing our border, this shows a really interesting look at it. The other one that we have that has not been digitized and a lot of people don't know about is we also have Nogales Customs Service records from the teens until the 1950s. And this has some really interesting information, like this document here is we've got a couple folders worth of their seizure reports. So when someone was bringing something across the border and it wasn't approved, they seized the property. So this is an interesting, taking these records and then seeing what other records you can find through other sources. It can give a really good picture of how the borders, how things have changed or really not changed across the border. And other collections that so mining, going back to kind of the environmental and social sort of histories, we have a lot of collections related to mines and mining. One of the most interesting ones, and we actually have a researcher from Sonora who is working on his dissertation on this collection. It's the Cananea Consolidated Copper Company. This is interesting because it's an American company working in Mexico, and they spanned the time of the Mexican Revolution. So there's a lot of interesting information about the impacts of the Mexican Revolution on exporting copper, on their operations. So it's another good view of the border from both sides of the border. There's also other related collections so we have a lot of collections that they're not the same, but they do have a lot of relations to them. Like this is from a photo collection. This is from 1906, and these are Bisbee miners who were walking to Cananea to support the 1906 Cananea strikes. So it gives an interesting view of labor history across the border as well. And finally, this one, we're going to go all the way to the other side of the border. This is the papers related to the Chamizo land dispute. So this was a border conflict over about 600 acres of land between El Paso and Juarez. And so the problem with having a river as your international boundary is that it shifts, and the Rio Grande has been shifting ever since they designated it the international boundary. And that has caused this piece of land that was started out as part of the US, the Rio Grande shifted, and all of a sudden part of it's part of Mexico now because that's the border. So this began happening in the almost as soon as they established the Rio Grande as the border. And then in 1906, this title company based out of El Paso, they went through and they just purchased Mexican titles to the land. It's very complex, and this whole dispute is still very active and kind of very ongoing and very damaging for this community. But we have this collection because it was donated by, I think there's 3 different collections that have information about this land dispute, and that includes land titles, deeds, depositions. I mean, this deposition about this person's land was from 1862, and it was donated by lawyers who also worked in Arizona, and so their collections ended up here. So we have a lot covering the entire border just here at the Arizona Historical Society. And that's really about all I had for today. I cut this down. I could go on and on about all the cool collections that we have that I hope people do more research with. But I think I'll stop here for the day and see if anybody has any questions for me.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for this wonderful presentation. As we were kind of mentioning before, I fell in love with the archives working on a project for the Barrio Viejo, the designation project to make it a National Historic Landmark. And it was really one of my favorite summers spending working in the archives, just the treasures that you have in there. So I just wanted to express my thanks for providing this introduction to the great resource that is the archive that's open to the public. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, or if you're shy, you can also write a question into the chat box. No questions. Well, one question that I had was, yeah, it was about basically you mentioned the Sonoran researcher coming in there to learn about the Cananea Copper Consolidated Company. Is that very frequently that you have, scholars, academics from across the line come and take advantage of the resources that Arizona has at the Historical Society?
It's not that common, but we do get it every once in a while. And yeah, it's not as common as you would think, but but every once in a while we do get people who are coming from across the border to do research. Would love to get more of that. Also would love to talk to them about what resources they have in their communities too.
Really? We've got a question here from Chuck Graff. He asks, what is the procedure for getting a digitized copy of a photo in your collection?
Oh yeah, so we do provide scans for a fee. All of those are actually on our website that's listed here, and we can always send it out afterwards. But we will digitize most everything in our collection. You just have to tell us what you want and what you're going to use it for. If you're just if you're going to use it for a exhibit or like a publication, we do charge use fees. But if you say just want this nice picture of this dog riding this horse to hang in your house, you're welcome to it.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I also was made aware of that wonderful project that Professor Jennifer Jenkins worked on through the access of the film reels that is also archive, which is kind of an amazing window into the past of our border region as well. So really, it kind of highlighted the fact that the possibilities are endless for us in terms of research that you guys have to offer there at the archive.
Yeah, no, we have so much. That one that Jennifer Jenkins did was the Western Ways collection, and they were a film and a production company and did a lot of like tourism related films to try and get people to come visit Arizona in the 50s through the 70s, and lots of films related to that. So that's a lot of fun.
We have a question here from Rachel Pollock. Have you seen any genealogical family documents compiled from the Tucson Mayor's Copper Certificate Program started in 1990?
I am not familiar with that, actually.
Interesting.
So no.
Sounds pretty interesting, Rachel. If you'd like to
talk
about that more, please feel free.
Yeah, and our email address is there too. So if you're looking for something specific, you can always reach out and we can see what we can do.
That can you hear me?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, send her an email.
You just muted yourself again. Okay, I think we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. But if no one else has any last minute questions, again, I want to thank Rachel for taking the time today and really highlighting this great resource that we have here in Southern Arizona. And I hope to return as a history enthusiast myself. I hope to return really, really soon. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Alrighty. Have a nice weekend.
Bye.